All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all so much for jumping from room to room and being here for the Inclusion Talk series in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month. I am thrilled to introduce our speaker, Dr. Farima Poor Kashid, who is a first-generation PhD and associate professor at the University of San Francisco. Her work spans local, national, and international contexts through her roles as a university professor, teacher, supervisor, educational consultant, public intellectual, published author, and educator/organizer. She has published numerous peer-reviewed articles and book chapters and has delivered over 200 invited keynote addresses, professional presentations, and guest lectures across the country. Her thought leadership has been featured on prominent public platforms like TEDx and NPR. Dr. Farima brings over a decade of experience in cultivating sacred spaces to heal from oppression on personal, interpersonal, and institutional levels. Her work is rooted in cycle breaking and communal care, centering collective vulnerability, critical reflection, and radical reimagination. In recognition of her healing-centered, humanizing, and abolitionist approaches to education, she was honored with the 40 Under 40 Leadership Award from California State University East Bay, and more recently, the Community Champion Award from Alameda County. And without further ado, I present to everyone Dr. Farima Kashid.
Thank you so much, Red. Hi, everybody. I feel really grateful to share space with you today, and I'm going to just share my screen. Is everybody able to see my screen? Okay. Yes, awesome.
Yes.
So thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I just want to start by expressing my deep, deep gratitude for the unceded Ohlone land that I am joining you from. I'm in the East Bay. I know many of you are spread out across the Bay Area. But just so grateful to be on this land. Also want to honor my friend and colleague, Rhett Burden, for inviting me to speak to this series. I know that it is really heavy work to be taking on the role of creating space to honor diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging during this political moment in time. So I'm just really grateful that you all have this opportunity and that we continue to create these spaces. So yeah, also just honored for the work that each of you are doing. It's not lost on me how heavy this work is at this time to be serving families, for you all to be a compass for so many families, and to bring healing to these families is something that I think needs to be deeply honored and celebrated. And so my intentions is not to talk at you all, today, but I just really want to build with you all. I want to take you on a little experiential journey in this keynote, um, to really just think about what it means to not only share our stories, but to also witness other stories. I do recognize that this is supposed to be to honor Latinx, Latin, Hispanic, whatever term you would like to use. All of them are colonial. So we'll kind of unpack that in my talk. But I think just the fact that we continue to center marginalized voices is super important. And with that said, I want to just take a moment to bring my ancestors into this space. I've lost a lot of people in my lifetime, in my family, and my friends. I've lost students. I was a kindergarten teacher for over 15 years. And I think that this work is impossible to do without the support of our ancestors. And so, if you have an ancestor that you want to honor in this space, I would just love it so much if you can share a name in the chat. And it could be an ancestor that is super intimate in your own life, but it could also be a freedom fighter, someone throughout history that has really shaped your thinking and who you are today. So I'm honoring my baby brother, Mike Maziar Khorshid, who is presente in this moment. Thank you. We're honoring Terry in this space and other people's mothers in this space. Thank you for bringing your mothers here. Gualberto, Ada, Big Mama D, Love, Arlene. Thank you for bringing your mothers and grandmothers in this space. Wow, Rosalba, Jean, we honor them. Thank you, Maria. for shaping who we are, for building a path for us. Thank you, Charlie. I see the names of these really important ancestors that make it possible for us to be here today. And I'm going to ask that you just continue to share names as you see fit. We want to honor them. Feel free to heart other ancestors' names as you see them in the chat. But we bring them into this space because our work would be meaningless without those that have come before us and shaped us. So thank you for bringing your ancestors into this space as well. And as you continue to share, I just want to ground us also in some community intentions. So, alongside our ancestors, what we've learned, right? We also want to create a space today where we are moving from a place of humility. And so, usually, anytime I do a keynote, anytime I teach a class, we read this communally. But I'm going to go ahead and just read it for you. Feel free to lip sync if you'd like, but I will read it aloud. And this is what I hope can ground us in today's experience. Together, we will create brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. So, in this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be held elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect, and this space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. Ashe. This is a poem by Mickey Scott Bay Jones, and I think it's just such a beautiful way to ground us in our intentions as we continue to think about our work in this moment. And as we continue to carry our ancestors into this space, I want to say, though, that a lot of the times when I come to talk about healing, people expect me to leave them feeling super rejuvenated and happy and positive. And I'm not saying that I'm not going to leave you feeling resourced and your soul's nourished. But I do want to warn us of the dangers of toxic positivity. I think oftentimes when we have talks, DEI talks, when we have moments where we are trying to name the moment and build courage, um, I think it's important to note that positivity itself is not necessarily toxic. Positivity becomes toxic when we use it to minimize or dismiss or invisibilize the current realities that people are experiencing today. And so, what can it look like for us to hold this current moment, to hold the grief, to hold the pain, while also building and finding hope? Because as we know, hope is a discipline. It's not just an emotion. It actually takes a lot of courage and it takes practice and it takes action to experience hope. And so, with that said, our pain is so important. Our pain is so, so important. In the words of Sandra Cisnero, who is, I think, has shaped a lot of our thinking about Hispanic or Latinx or Latine heritage through her writing and her book, she said, "You were given that pain and that vision because you have something to do with it." So, what does it mean to allow our pain to be generative? And so, when I speak about healing, and particularly when I talk about it through the lens of sharing our stories, I have to also name that my thinking has been deeply shaped by a former professor of mine, which many of you may know as former Black Panther Party, Dr. Angela Davis, who was one of my professors at UC Santa Cruz. But she said this thing where she says, radical simply means grasping things at the root. So for me, radical healing would be, what does it mean for us to really think about healing from the roots of the oppression that many of us have been insulated in and shaped by in our lived experience navigating the world, right? And I think it's important to give context. Why? Because if you've never read My Grandmother's Hand, by Resmaa Menakem. His whole book is geared toward what does it mean to heal from racialized trauma. And he says this thing that I think is important. He talks about the importance of context because, as we know, context allows us to understand how and why things happen the way that they did. And so he says, over time, trauma gets decontextualized. We lose the context for it. And so then trauma decontextualized in a person looks like just their personalities. This is how sometimes we can be like, ooh, that person, their personality is just stank, right? And we tend to personalize it, pathologize it even, right? Trauma decontextualized in a family looks like family traits, and trauma decontextualized in a people looks like culture. But if we're not careful, I think it's important for us to also acknowledge that trauma decontextualized in history today looks like the American dream, right? And so, as an educator, it's been so important for me to also make sure that we understand that all of us who have ever been educated have experienced a sort of collective trauma. What does it mean to be traumatized by the stripping of our identities, of our languages, of our spirituality, of our dignity, of our sovereignty, right? What does it mean for those histories to be erased, including the ways that many of us have been categorized as quote unquote Hispanic, knowing that that is a term that was created by the Nixon administration during a time where they were just trying to quickly categorize folks that were non-white, right? And even moving into the idea or the terms of Latinx, Latin, any of these other terms, what happens is these terms become umbrella categories and they erase the indigeneity and the Afro descendants that also exist within our cultures and our people, right? It excludes, it invisibilizes the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Incas, and so it's important that as we think about celebrating a people who have always and historically in this country been marginalized, what does it mean to repair that harm? What does it mean to heal from that harm collectively? Because trauma, um, it actually passes down from generation to generation. And oftentimes, when it becomes normalized and we become desensitized, we don't even know that we engender trauma from previous generations. So, if folks are familiar with this idea of epigenetics. It's the study of how trauma gets passed down from the DNA, right? And so, what does that look like when we all have been socialized and indoctrinated to understand some people as superior and some as inferior, right? And so, with that said, what I want to talk to us about is this idea of why our testimonials matter. And I want to break down what testimonials means. So, when I was in my PhD program, I used testimonial as a method, a research method in particular, that engages storytellers and witnesses in critical reflections about their own racialized lived experiences to bring about awareness about change and consciousness raising, about our collective struggles and resistance. But rather than letting somebody else define us, this is a mode of resistance by allowing us to define ourselves, right? And so this is actually rooted in ancestral oral traditions that have come before us from some of the ancestors that, some of you have even shared in the chat, some of those stories, those firsthand accounts and lived experiences. It's so, so important that we hold these stories because, in the words of Arthur Riley, she says the oppressor can never be trusted as historian. Our task is preservation. Collective memory is a liberation practice. So, as we think about our own stories and as we think about witnessing the stories of the families that we serve through the work that we do, it's really, really important to think about these stories as resistance and to actually look for some of these patterns that they're bringing up in their stories. I also was fortunate to hear from Gloria Ansaldua's work and to learn from her work as a woman of color feminist when I was at UC Santa Cruz. But she talks about the politics of writing our stories, and she talks about how she writes to be able to name what others have erased when she speaks and to rewrite the stories others have miswritten about her, right? And to become more intimate with herself and to others, and to discover herself and to preserve herself and to create herself and to achieve that self autonomy. So, our stories are really political. And when we share our stories as collective testimonial, this practice of being able to listen to someone else's story to bear witness and to hear from it allows us to hear our own discomforts, to find out who else shares them, who validates them, And it's in that exchange of our stories that we can find the patterns and the systems and the explanations and the context of how and why things happen, right? That is actually the central process of collective consciousness raising and testimonio. And so, with that said, I want to share my own story, if that's all right with you. I want to talk about my own journey toward healing engagement, healing centered engagement and abolition in particular. And as I share my story, I'm going to give you all a little task. I'm going to ask you to witness my story, but in witnessing, I want you to try to find what are some patterns that you hear in my story? What are some systems for why things happened in my life? What are the explanations that you're able to kind of pull out as a theme from my story? Is that all right? Can I see a thumbs up if you're okay with that? All right. Thank you so much. All right. I wrote this poem a few years ago because, truth be told, I have been in therapy for several years and I've been doing a lot of work on inner child healing and inner teenage healing. And so this was actually part of my therapy homework that I now use to share across the world. So thank you in advance for bearing witness. At just 5 years old, I put together my first puzzle. I connected the pieces between my daddy being murdered, my mommy being scared and broken and immigrant, and school being the place where my trauma would become grounds for punishment. Grief still lingering in my nervous system, sometimes lying dormant, hiding in isolation, other times erupting in rage because there weren't enough smelly stickers in the world to mend my family's broken heart. And at the time, I had a teacher who chose to time me out into the corners of the room, safety pinning elementary citations on my back instead of asking me what was wrong, instead of teaching me tools to self regulate, instead of hugging me and saying it would be okay. With so many choices, she chose to be punitive. And those citations guaranteed double the punishment at home. After all, back in my mother's land, the Afro Indigenous Caribbean coast of Nicaragua was where her people were colonized by the Spanish and the British. And that violence found its way into her classrooms long after the act, perpetuated by adults that unknowingly internalized generations upon generations of colonization. And yet, decades later, and thousands of miles away further, there I was, also surrounded by adults that unknowingly internalized generations upon generations of colonization, perverting our existence with carceral logics and deficit lenses. Because school violence surpasses borders and cultures, it is global and timeless, and the normalcy of it all was what my spirit was determined to disrupt. You see, I was called to be a cycle breaker since before I was formed in my mother's womb, when I was dreamt of by ancestors that prayed for our collective liberation. And so maybe that's why I got caught ditching in sixth grade with my best friends, our act of refusal and righteous rebellion. After all, we were the girls of color, always punished for choosing freedom, punished for resisting the policing of our bowels every time we'd escape to the bathroom, punished for not singing creepy colonial songs like, Are You Sleeping? Wondering who the hell was Brother John anyway, punished for passing notes filled with Black and brown girl affirmations instead of reading books by white authors about stories that had nothing to do with us, punished for not producing the worksheet quotas before the bell rung, punished for not walking silently in line, punished for not rushing to eat manufactured food in the few minutes we were given, punished for not freezing and dropping to the ground when the guards, I mean, the yard duty blew whistles after recess, punished for talking, for laughing, for playing, for hurting, for being. We grew tired of being punished for not conforming or complying with standards or metrics that we never even consented to. And so we found ways to defy the dress codes that adultified and criminalized our young bodies, wearing forbidden spaghetti strap tops and gang colored scrunchies stacked in our hair, bartering lip glosses and lip liners that were banned at school, rotating who would be next to hold the double dutch ropes in their backpack that I stole from the PE teacher, always fueled with the adrenaline of ancestral resistance flowing in our blood. If we learned anything at all, we learned to find joy in our resistance, and we prepared for it in advance, at home, doubling up on those thick sweatpants and buying phones from thrift stores to hide under the bed for three-way calls when we were grounded, threatened with detention, suspensions, grade retentions, you name it. The message was clear. If we obeyed, then we were good. If we rebelled, then we were bad. But nobody would bother asking us why we were resisting in the first place. And so the way I saw it, school felt like purgatory, caught in that confusing space between childhood and child hell, transgressing the oppression between the main office and the classroom in search of the glory that we knew had to exist beyond the confines of those multiple choice bubbles and outdated textbooks. I didn't know it then, but I was a young abolitionist. I'm sorry, there we go. I was resisting racialized youth oppression, melanated, marked as problem child because I dared to resist school compliance and I chose to practice joy and liberation instead, failing to complete homework but never missing a single talent show rehearsal or step practice, pretending to be sick to skip after school intervention while sneaking off to learn about African diasporic stories and dances with Miss Moore, or learning Caribbean traditional dance with my friend's mom and older sisters, or recruiting all the homies to learn salsa for the Dia de los Muertos celebrations, or writing poems about my experience, or reading books that I chose at the library. The fact is, I loved learning. I just hated schooling. And somewhere along the line, the little girl grew up and she decided to become a teacher, to heal that little child inside her and to teach little children just like her. And so she spent years getting hella degrees later, only to find that my younger self is still my greatest teacher. I still learn from her pain and from her anger. I still learn from her fear and from her courage. I still learn from her wisdom and from her joy. And so I did what my younger self told me to do. I began to search for other rebellious spirits committed to our liberation. And I realized that they were also searching for me in the field of education. And we created our own spaces to feel free. And we learned the difference between education and schooling. And we learned that taking care of ourselves and one another was key, and that resisting our own oppression would help us all get free. And we learned that in so doing, it would also bring us healing for our ancestors, for our family lineages, for our students yesterday, today, tomorrow, and for the generations to come, driven by the clarity that as long as children like us are in these schools, we have no choice but to heal, to dream, to create, to collectivize, and to organize, because as Ruth Wilson Gilmore reminds us, if it takes a village to raise a child, it certainly takes a movement to undo an occupation. So let us move together. I'm going to ask that we take a collective breath. I want to thank you for witnessing my story. And now I'm going to ask for you to do a little bit of some hard work for a moment. I'm going to put you in a breakout room. And I'm going to ask for you to just take a moment to unpack my story. What did you witness? Share your name and pronouns, but also did you see any patterns in my story? Did you see any systems or explanation or context? Maybe from your own experience that you resonate with, or from what you've witnessed from the families that you've served. All right. So I'm only going to give us a couple of minutes because I don't have too much time, but I'm going to put that prompt in the chat so that you can follow along. And I'm now going to put us in a breakout room. we'll have about 3 minutes. All right. And see you in a bit. I'm trying to see, okay. I'm trying to see how I can put us in breakout rooms for 2 people, but it's not letting me do that. So you're actually going to be, there we go. You might be in a group of 3 people. All right. There you go. And it looks like a few people are not in a room. So I'm going to go ahead and assign you to a room.
Okay.
Yeah, just throw them in a room. Some people have to go to the restroom and do other
Okay.
things. Yeah, just throw them in.
All right.
It has to be a room of 3. We should be able to add folks to the room.
Okay.
I didn't have anyone else in my room.
All right. Let me go ahead and send you to a different room.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for letting me know. All right. And I will.
You can move people into rooms too.
I also no one was in my room, so I just left it.
Then I won't.
Thank you. Usually it does it automatically, but for some reason it wasn't letting me do that.
We'll
No
get
te
you
So
in
let
the
me go
room.
ahead.
Francisco Ferrer, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, bien.
You should be able to hit accept everybody, because if you get moved into a room, just hit yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Some of these other folks may not be directly in front of their computer.
And I'm trying to
Yeah, you should be able to just go through and see. If one person has only one person in their room, they can be put into a separate room.
mhm. So we're gonna go to move to 3. And we're going to and 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 so I'm just moving folks. Are you also moving folks, Rhett?
I can,
Okay, no, I just want to make sure we're not
no, I can move folks if
okay.
you need me to.
No, that's okay. Okay. All right. I'm just gonna give us about 1 more minute and then we can debrief together because it looks like it didn't assign folks automatically.
That works.
And it should be that everybody, yeah.
Mhm. Here's the minute you can close all rooms and just let the 60-second countdown do it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that did not work out as planned. So I appreciate the grace. All right. All right. I know folks are still coming back. We have about 30 more seconds. All right. All right. I see some more folks coming in. Have about 20 seconds. All right. All right, so my apologies. It looked like the breakout room was not as easy as it normally is. It didn't assign folks automatically. So I appreciate the grace. And I'm just going to ask, is anyone able to share any reflections that you were able to either talk to a partner about or that you just reflected on your own? Were you able to notice any patterns, any systems, any explanations from my testimonial? And I'm going to ask if there's any vulnerageous souls to share. I use the term, we made it up in our organization, but in order to be courageous, you got to be vulnerable. And in order to be vulnerable, you got to be courageous. So Fernando is going to be vulnerageous. Thank you, Fernando. Yeah, what was something that came up for you?
Yeah, thank you so much for the testimonial, doctor. I noticed like the school to prison pipeline was really heavy in your testimonial, like a lot of prison language, right? Like guards and being within confines, having to follow rules, being in line. And so that's a pretty common thing, not only in our like own communities, like Latina communities, but a lot of POC communities, right? It's the school to prison.
Yes. Thank you so much for lifting that up. And a lot of my work now is really thinking about and pushing folks to see that it's actually not even a pipeline, because a pipeline would suggest that schools are neutral places that are somewhat utopian, but actually schools have part of the mechanisms of policing built within them. So it's actually more of a nexus. It's like a web. What are the different kinds of ways that carcerality shows up in our education? So thank you for lifting that up, Fernando. Were there any other systems, patterns that folks were able to notice in my testimonial?
Yeah, I can share very briefly. Throughout your poem, which is very beautiful, was me recognizing just the conditioning, um, and how it can be very invisible and it can be unseen, and how it really operates through people and systems, and it's intergenerational, and it's really woven into the status quo. And through all of that, there's just this big collective grief that happens because you are
Mhm.
removing that sovereignty that you were speaking to about earlier. So, yeah.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. Is it Hema or Gemma?
Hema.
Hema. Thank you for sharing that, Hema. Yeah, so even when we talk about culture, sometimes there are aspects of our cultures that are very colonial. And just because it's been in our lineages doesn't mean that it was ever ours. And so, what does that healing look like when we think about serving populations also? Um, and so I think what's important for me to also break down is what I mean by this idea of healing cycles of harm, right? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share once again and do this. All right. All right. So, what I want to do is kind of break down how I understand this work and when I talk about using stories as a method for healing. So, all of us have been born into a world that was already shaped by ideological oppression, right? So, ideological oppression is all of the ideas and systems of belief that are rooted around the superiority and inferiority of groups of people, right? And those ideas and those systems of belief, they literally shape our environment, like the air that we breathe. And for some of us can't breathe, the water we drink, and for many of us cannot drink, right? But also just how we move through the world. And those social toxins rain down on us as internalized oppression. So when I speak of social toxicity, I want to talk about how Dr. James Gabarino gives this analogy of like, imagine physical toxins. If you go into a room where you're exposed to physical toxicity, let's say it's asbestos, right? Your exposure in that room for one day, you might just be fine, but repeated exposure to those toxins over time can become lethal. And so he says the same about these social toxins. Repeated exposure to these kinds of toxicities, these social toxicities over time can quite literally kill our spirits, right? And our bodies. And so with internalized oppression, that is the way that these oppressive belief systems get ingrained in us as self-hatred, hindering our own spiritual and emotional growth, right? And it looks like internalizing the harm that we experience within ourselves, our own internal narratives, right? And so I want to talk about that a little more too. One of the longer term impacts of trauma, and racialized trauma at that, um, originates within us, but also gets acted out in our interpersonal relationships. So that's why it's really important for us to really notice our own cycles of harm and how the harm that we've inherited from our socialization in this world gets acted inwards as internalizing our pain. That's when we tend to engage in self-harm and harmful narratives about ourselves. But also how it gets acted out and we externalize that pain, right? And so I want to also acknowledge that both acting inwards or outwards is not necessarily a binary, right? Either are harmful, but the more that we're able to build our own awareness of how we've inherited some of these harmful practices and ideas, the more that we're able to heal, right? And so when we think about our own interpersonal relationships, oftentimes what happens is we've been socialized to want to dominate and have power over people in our lives as opposed to having power with people horizontally in our lives, right? This is the ways in which we internalize privilege and oppression, and they play out in our relational dynamics. And so when we think about our own identities, there is some internal work that needs to happen for us to really think about what are the places of power that we embody within our identities that we actually can utilize in service of solidarity as opposed to in service of oppression because we are socialized to want to oppress, right? So that takes rigorous work to really be honest about who you are and the families that you serve and to really think about your responsibility to acknowledging that power and that privilege, and what it means to work with those that you work with, right? And then, of course, we have institutional oppression, and that's the way in which harmful practices, policies, and values shape our institutions. And that could be a home, that could be a church, that could be Compass Family Services, right? No one is immune to these issues. And so one of my dear mentors, Dr. Sean Ginwright, talked about how it's actually really important for us to move away from pathologizing individual people for not being able to survive some of these harmful environments. And he uses the term persistent traumatic stress environments. And that removes the pathology on individual people for having to survive systems in the ways that they have. And it puts the onus on what are the structural and systemic conditions that have actually made it more difficult for folks on the margins to experience healthy lifestyles, to experience housing and security and well-being, right? What are the ways that these issues are not determined by someone's biology, but actually by a history of policies that exclude and that inflict harm and make it more difficult for families and people to be healthy, right? So then that means we actually need to have an approach to break these cycles. And that's where I see healing-centered engagement as a way to permeate the work that we're doing, right? It's about breaking cycles of harm and pain and reinventing new ways of being with ourselves, being with each other, being with the world, right? And being in right relationship to people, to land, to resources, to spirit, right? So it's a different way to engage the work that we're doing. And we already come from legacies of resistance and solidarity. So this is actually not new. right? We're not the first to experience oppression. We know so many freedom fighters that have come before us, many of which were young people, but that embodied in transgenerational resilience and manifested it as these coping and healing mechanisms and strategies that help to navigate the traumatic stress, right? But also that help to sustain and preserve culture and spirituality and dignity despite the oppression, right? So when we think about these different examples throughout history, there was always coalition work that was happening. There was always work that was designed to help us to get to where we are today. And so when we look at the context that we're in today, when we look at all of these different movements that we are bearing witness to in this moment, it's really, really important to remember that every single social movement is birthed in someone's pain, right? And it's informed by our stories, it's grown through our cycle breaking, and it evolves through our collective healing. Right? In order for us to have healthy movements, in order for us to create change, we have to make sure that we're not repeating and recreating the same oppression that we have fallen victim to, even within our movement spaces, right? And so when I think about Dolores Huerta, who is a longtime organizer, she talks about how every single moment is an organizing opportunity. Every person is a potential activist. Every minute is a chance to change the world. And so many of us are already working with families that engender different roles that actually support the kind of movements that we are currently engaging in to resist and to create a new world. So Deepa Iyer came up with this social change ecosystem. And she talks about how it's in these times of crisis where we actually really need to bring our fullest selves to the causes and the movements that matter. And there's so many roles that we can take on. Many of you already engender these roles, right? And so when we think about the healers, these are the folks that are tending to the generational and current traumas that are caused by these oppressive systems. Many of us know or are working with disruptors. And these are the folks that are taking the risk and actions to shake up the status quo, to raise awareness and to build power. Many of us might be caregivers, and we have to nurture and nourish the people around us. That is actually movement work, right? Sustaining a community of joy and care and connection. Some of us are builders, where we develop and organize and implement ideas in service of a collective vision. Some of us are visionaries. This is where we imagine and we generate bold possibilities and hopes and dreams to remind us of our direction. Some of us are frontline responders. And this is where we address community crises by organizing resources and networks and messages. Many of you are already doing this work in Compass Family Services, right? And many of us are experimenters, where we are going to try to invent some things that don't currently exist, and we course correct as needed. We know weavers who see the through lines of the connectivity between the people and places and organizations and ideas and movements. We know guides. Many of them have been ancestors who continue to guide us, but these are the folks that teach and counsel and advise using their discernment and their wisdom. And of course, all of us are storytellers. This is where we can share our community stories and cultures and experiences and histories and possibilities, whether it be through art, through media, through music, through movement, right? And so when I think of Puerto Rican ancestor Roberto Clemente, he was actually known not only for his tremendous, baseball skills and for being part of the Major League Hall of Fame, but he's also known because of all of his humanitarian work. He actually died on a mission to engage in some humanitarian aid. But he says, if you have a chance to accomplish something that will make things better for people coming behind you, and if you don't do that, then you're wasting your time on this earth. And I want us to sit with that idea. And I'm going to ask, if you allow me and if you trust me, I want to guide you through an ancestral visualization practice. And I'm going to ask that if you feel so comfortable, I'm going to ask that you plant your feet on the ground in this moment. And if you feel comfortable, I'm going to ask that you close your eyes because I am going to ask you to visualize with me. All right. So that's going to require you to be present with your eyes closed. And you can also keep your eyes open if that feels more comfortable. All right. I'm going to ask that you begin to take a deep breath. And as you breathe, I want you to become mindful of your heart beating and sending blood and new oxygen to every part of your body. Thank you for those who are present in this moment. As you breathe out, I want you to channel some gratitude for this life that's flowing inside you right now. And I want you to feel your breath as it's bringing life to every single cell of your body. Know that your heart beating in this moment is also the heart of your ancestors, your spiritual ancestors, your land ancestors, your family ancestors, those who once were, and those who are now transitioned into the spiritual realms. And so I want you to imagine these ancestors as light beaming all over you and around you in this moment. And we're going to visualize, we're going to travel back into time. It could be 5 years ago, it could be 50 years ago, it could be 500 years ago. Let your mind visualize back to an ancestor. It could be a human that you knew or that you didn't know. But this ancestor, it was their choices in life that made it possible for you to be here. Who is this ancestor that you can see in this visualization? You don't even have to know who they are, but just say hello to them. And as you connect with this ancestor, I want you to visualize your breath as the connection to their dreams, to their resilience and healing, to their joy, to their strength, to their wisdom, to their courage, to their infinite love for you. Imagine that your breath is a messenger, reassuring them that you are determined to continue to nourish your heart and your spirit with their eternal love that runs through you. Because of the choices that they've made, you get to be here today. So ask them for their ancestral wisdom to help you to move through this moment of grief that we're experiencing in this lifetime, in this moment. What does that spiritual discernment look like? Imagine that your breath is communicating your commitment to transform that pain and that grief into the deepest forms of love within your spirit. Your commitment to break cycles, to create new paths toward generational healing and wellness. Perhaps you can notice what they did so that you could be here. Notice that feeling of that choice and how it lives in your body today. We're going to thank that ancestor. And we're going to visualize now traveling back to this present moment and now going straight into the future. You're going to journey in maybe 50 years from now, maybe 500 years from now, as far as it feels right to go. And in this future, imagine a being. It could be a great, great, great grandchild or grandniece or any other being in the future. But it's because of the choices that you made that they get to live in that future. And they get to have all kinds of choices that maybe you didn't even get to imagine in your lifetime. But all these small and big ripple effects of your brave choices created the conditions for them to live in this future. And imagine that being turning to you and saying, thank you. Maybe they have a different piece of information for you from the future. Something important that you need to know about today. What does their love look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? want you to keep breathing as you embrace that wisdom and love. We're going to thank them. And when you feel ready, I'm going to ask that you come back to this call with me. I want to thank you for engaging in that visualization. And I'm just going to ask one more time, is there a vulnerable soul that can just share, how did it feel to just try to visualize your ancestors or even into the future? What did that feel like for you? And it's okay if it was difficult. Feel free to unmute if you want to share. What did it feel like to try to connect? Was anyone able to visualize an ancestor?
I'd like to share.
Thanks, Francisco.
It is reassuring to realize that our roots are deep. And I visualize my uncle, who was my first, as a child, my first reference of a person building his own path. He literally took off.
Mm,
And my grandma didn't see him for 15 years. When he came back, that way, when I hear that story, it's like, whoa, I want to do that. So,
mm,
now my family runs that story. Listen, like, how do you build your path? How do you find
mm,
yourself? How do you become who you want to be?
mhm.
That's also in reference to your story, growing up,
Yeah.
growing up in the system. But what do you do to walk away, or have that impulse of building your own path? That's what I want to say.
Thank you so much for sharing, Francisco. Yeah, like our lives are living legacies, right? We are in it right now. We're creating our legacies as we go. And so I just want to like appreciate the folks that really tried to visualize ancestors both from the past but also into the future, because the fact of the matter is like we are the ancestors of the future, and what we do today is going to have an impact, and we have that choice. And so I want to thank you. I want to thank you for bearing witness. I want to thank you for also being present today. And I think we only have about 5 minutes, but I want to just open it up for any kind of reflections or questions that are coming up for folks as you're thinking about this current moment, as you're thinking about what it means to support folks that you are working with and working for and in service of in this moment, as you think about some of the things that I've shared today.
Rima, I'll unspotlight you so you can see folks.
Um, I'll speak. I'm Celia. Thank you for Rima. I just want to thank you for coming and being vulnerable and saying your story and letting us know. It's very inspiring. It lets us know we're not alone, and it's also encouraging. And so I just wanted to say thank you.
Mm, Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Yeah, like even if it's just simple representation of seeing that someone like me who experienced the things that I've experienced still continues to engage this work, it matters. We need to see each other, right? Never in a million years did I ever think that this is the kind of work that I would be doing, and yet I've been called to do it. And I really truly believe that each of you have been called to be who you are in this moment to support the families that you all are serving. We need y'all. We need y'all. And we also need us to be well and to be grounded in our purpose, right? Yes, thank you for that, Ray. My ancestors stand behind and beside me. A large, strong Black woman with arms crossed, watching me, a small Native Indian woman whose hand is on the back of my neck and melds into my flesh, and for a reason that I understand, but do not like a white man who just stares at me. Ooh, that was so poetic. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ray. Wow, that is a beautiful, beautiful story and testimonio of what you experienced in that visualization. Thank you all. Thank you all. I know that this is a stretch and that usually you're probably accustomed to having keynotes that are very much cognitive. And I wanted to take you into a spiritual, experiential um, activity today. So thank you for those that were vulnerageous and participated. I appreciate y'all and I will pass it over to Rhett.
Thank you so much. If you all would just give a round of applause for Farima. Thank you, Farima, for the work that you do in the community, the scholarship that you put out, and being here with us today to serve as our virtual keynote. Question for you, for anyone that wants to follow your work or follow the things that you do before you close, can you let people know how they can stay in contact with you?
Absolutely. You can email me. I will put it in the chat right now. Also, thank you so much for the love. I really appreciate y'all so much. So that is my email. It's the first letter of my first name and then my last name at usf.edu. And then you can also follow me on Instagram. And that my handle is at Dr. Farima with an underscore. But I appreciate y'all.
I'm sorry. I just want to say one more thing. I meant to say Dr. Farina. So I don't want to forget that. I want to point that out. So sorry about that. Thank you.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. We have, I believe, our final presentation for training day with our very own Joe at 3:10. So please go take care of yourselves. We'll see you back on Zoom at 3:10. Thank you so much, everybody.